of my absolute favorites is your stories from the North Cascades. Maybe we can start out with small footprints.
Okay, sure. There's a well-known Sasquatch researcher who used to be based here in Washington named John Andrews. He has some phenomenal audio recordings. If anybody's ever heard them, they're probably some of the best Sasquatch audio recordings ever recorded. They rival the Sierra Sounds, in my opinion. Anyway, John Andrews had a location that he would frequent in the North Cascades of Washington. And there was a lake up there. And over the years, many times, he would go up there. A very high percentage of his visits at this particular lake, which has a marsh on one end of it, he would find in that marsh footprints, human-like footprints, barefoot prints, no shoes. And over the years, however, these tracks, their footprints that he would find, they would always be less than 8 inches long. And he had other encounters up there also, which led him to believe that whatever was leaving the footprints probably wasn't a human. So he spoke with some rangers up there, and they shared privately with him that they had seen the footprints as well. And anyway, John Andrews befriended a fellow named Doug Howl and told Doug all about it. And so Doug decided to go up and check this lake out. And he went up with a couple friends, and they found exactly the tracks that John had described. Doug told me all about it, and I said, Doug, you got to take me there. And so Doug took me with him. And it's just Doug and I, we hiked in. You got to hike in 7 miles from the end of the road. You have to take everything with you on your back, backpacking. And once you get to the lake, it's infested with mosquitoes. So it's not pleasant to be there. You have to douse yourself in mosquito repellent and wear long sleeves and a head net. But the first night we were there, before it got dark, we checked for tracks, and there were no tracks anywhere. That night it rained all night long, heavy thunderstorms, windy, high winds, heavy rains, and pitch dark, pitch black. And the next morning, I got up early, shortly after sunrise. Was walking down toward the lake through the marsh, and boom, there were tracks everywhere. Barefoot tracks. We later found 2 trackways, and one trackway was 7 3/4 inches long, and the other trackway was 6 1/2 inches long, the footprints.
So what were you thinking at that point? Were you like, midget? What was going through your mind?
I tried to figure out what could have left these tracks because, excuse me, those tracks were not there the night before. And so overnight, while we were there sleeping in our tents, not very far, maybe 60 feet away, two somethings had walked past our camp through the marsh, through the muddy soil, and left these distinct, perfect, human-looking tracks. And they were so perfect, the soil conditions were so perfect that you could clearly see the dermal ridges from the bottom of the foot. And I took several photographs. We did not have any casting material with us because we didn't want to have to carry that extra weight up there, and we didn't really even know if we were going to find any tracks. It also had to have been a couple fat kids, because of the way they sunk into the mud. We took our shoes and socks off the next morning and tried to see how far we would sink in, and we didn't sink in nearly as far. And so it's hard to imagine that scenario, 6 to 10 year old, two 6 to 10 year old fat kids walking around under those conditions out in the middle of nowhere, 7 miles from the nearest parking lot. Um, but then that begs the question, what in the world could be doing that? Because Sasquatch tracks are usually much larger than that. And so anyway, that was August. And then 2 months later, we went back, September, and we found the tracks again. And this time we had casting material, and I made some casts of the tracks weren't as good this time because the vegetation in the marsh had gotten a lot thicker, and so the tracks, the dirt was a little drier and had more grass in it, so it didn't leave as good of tracks. But we got one really good one of the 7 3/4, and we made that cast, and I subsequently showed that cast to Dr. Meldrum, who is anthro I don't know, he's a foot expert, whatever they call that. He's an expert on bipedal motion of the feet of bipeds, I believe.
Yes.
And he looked at the cast and the photographs from that I'd taken in August, and he explained his reasons, which went over my head, and he pointed at them and said his fancy words and everything, and explained why he did not believe that they were made by humans. And he said, if you go back there and you get any more casts or any more photographs of tracks like this, please let me know. And I have been back twice since, and both the return visits after that did not yield any tracks. So we haven't gotten any more evidence from there. But what could be making those tracks is a mystery. It's unknown. If it's Sasquatch, it's super young Sasquatches, or midget, or I guess that's not a popular word these days, or appropriate word.
People, Kirk, you don't have to be a jerk.
Okay. Little people Sasquatches, whatever you want to call them.
Another thing is, there's, legends of little people.
And yes, that's the next option.
Is that a possibility? Who knows what a little person is, and what?
Well, that's why finding
are.
Right, that's why finding these tracks just really blew my mind. It's one thing to find a Sasquatch track, that's super awesome, but to find small tracks that didn't fit into any line of thinking that I had entertained.
It's blowing my mind hearing the story.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
and
Jonathan and I had talked about this before. Out of all my research and the different tracks I've ran across and the castings and everything, my personal favorite one that I have is like 4.5 to 5 inches long. And because you don't run across a lot of younger or smaller tracks like that, but it was also accompanied by 2 adults. And you're saying this place over the years has never yielded any tracks larger than 8 inches.
Correct. That's what John Andrews has. Every time he's found tracks, it's been less than 8 inches long. And 8 inches or less.
You would think even in the time, between your trips to the location, if it was 2 individuals that were children of some kind, they would have grown.
Right.
That's just mind blowing. That is definitely a mystery worth looking into.
Somebody else suggested that maybe it's what they call a rookery. Maybe the Sasquatches keep station their youngsters there year after year. So every year there's a new batch of young Sasquatches that are always leaving the smaller tracks. That's another possibility.
Right. The area where I found the track I was talking about, we call it the bathhouse. And it's by an area that we believe is like a nursery type station for them.
Yes.
But they still have adults there with them.
Good point.
We still find the larger tracks. That's just, that's one of the things that you experience as a researcher that really just it kind of becomes offensive at a certain point internally, and you have to keep your cool about it whenever you run across people who are like, "Oh, come on, man, you know these things aren't real. Like, they never found one." Like, and you're just like, you haven't seen the things we've seen. Like, how do you
Right.
explain that? Well, okay, you tell me what something with a foot that size is doing out 7 miles off the road in the middle of nowhere in those kind of
Right.
conditions, running around in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm,
Right.
and not caring that there's people camping 60 feet away. Like, that's just kind of spooky, man.
I agree.
Hey,
And
Kirk, maybe tell us about the other spooky things that have happened there.
well, I told you we've gone back twice since we found the tracks and casted the best example. And both the 2 times we went back, we had no evidence that we found no more tracks. But that didn't mean that the trips didn't have some interesting things that happened. I was up there with the fellow named Doug Howe. Again, he's the one who first introduced me to the location. And then another fellow named Kurt Hipke went with us. And so it was the 3 of us on our last trip there. And we made our camp, looked for tracks. There were no tracks, but we were still hoping to have some interaction and activity because we've encountered wood knocks up there and a couple strange sounds that we couldn't identify. Nothing real substantial though, but we were hoping for some activity that night. And everything got dark and calm. And it's about midnight. We decided to go on a walk on the trail. And so we're out walking on the trail, and Doug and Kurt, they have an ability that I guess I don't have. They were seeing lights, white orbs, or I don't know how to describe them, but they were both seeing them. They were both identifying the same illuminated floating objects that I could not see. And at first they were pretty entertained by it. They didn't feel threatened. They thought it was kind of cool. And we didn't think all that much of it, especially me, because I couldn't see them. But then as we continued to walk down the trail, up ahead of us in the trail would be a large, maybe 4 feet tall blob of light. It wasn't super bright, but both Kurt and Doug reported they could both see it clearly. I could not see it. I can only describe it to you based on what they told me it looked like. So as we're walking down the trail, single file, with no headlights on, no headlamps, and it was really dark. And so when I say we're walking down the trail, we were feeling our way down the trail. We were walking duck-toed with our toes pointed out so we could feel the edges of the trail and following it. Doug was first, Kurt was second, and I was the third in line. And Doug and Kurt were both seeing it, and they would say, "There it is." And then we'd all stop, and I'd look up the trail, and I'd try to see it, and I could not see it despite trying hard. And I have good vision. So they kept reporting it, and when they would see it, what would happen is they'd see it, it would be on the trail, and then it would drift off to the right or to the left and disappear into the brush. And then we'd proceed on and walk past the location where it had been. They couldn't see it anymore. And we'd continue down the trail, and we'd come around a corner, and there it would be again, right on the trail. And they'd see it there. And every time they saw it, they reported that it kept getting brighter and brighter. And it seemed to, every time they saw it, it kept getting more and more definition. And they started kind of getting freaked out about it. And finally, one time we came around a corner and there it was, and it was very clear and very distinct. They said to the point where they could see a face, a human-like face, and it looked to them like it was a woman wearing a ball gown, that, you know, a dress that goes wider as it goes down. And one of the two gentlemen said that it looked like they could see its face, and like it was making a face and stuck its tongue out at him. And that's what they reported. What was so freaky is I have my thermal imager during this entire time, and I'm looking through my thermal imager trying to pick up any kind of heat signature that it might be creating, and there's nothing. There's nothing, no heat signature at all. And I couldn't see it with the thermal imager took my night vision out of my right eye, but I could clearly see with the night in the dark with my left eye, and I couldn't see what they were seeing. And so they really started getting concerned when they could see it so clearly this last time, and I couldn't see it. So I was not afraid of it because I couldn't see it. And so I said, all right, guys, you tell me what it does. I'm going to walk to it, right up on it. And they said, no way, you can't do that. I said, why? I'm not afraid of it because I can't see it. And they were both, well, okay, if you that's what you want to do. And so I said, tell me what it does as I walk to it. And so I'm looking through my thermal imager as I'm walking down the trail because the thermal is helping me see the trail. And they said, yeah, you're right. You're getting closer and closer to it. Oh, now it's elevating. So as I got closer to it, the image that they were seeing elevated and then was floating above the trail, above me, about 20 feet in the air. And so they said, it's above you. And so I'm standing there with the thermal, and I'm looking up in the sky now with my thermal, trying to see this thing that they're seeing, and I can't see anything. And then they said it drifted off to the right and then dropped down to the ground and then disappeared into the brush again.
Why do you think that it elevated above you?
Because I was approaching it. What it was, though, I have no idea.
Did they happen to mention if she had maybe a size 7 foot?
No, they could not see it that detailed that they could see the feet. No, but I was not upset because I couldn't see it, but I did get a little concerned and unsettled because they were both very concerned and very unsettled. One of the fellows was so freaked out by it that he could not control his emotions, and he was shaking. He couldn't stop himself from shaking in fear. And they were both having extreme responses, extreme emotional reactions to something. And so even though I couldn't see it, hear it, detect it in any way, they both had to have been seeing something.
They were
responding
experiencing
to
something.
Yes. And so I can't take it away from them that it wasn't there because they both went through it. And it was concerning to me that I was stuck out in the woods 7 miles from nowhere with two guys who were freaking out. But they both pulled themselves together, and we headed back to camp after that and kept the fire going all night until sunrise. Then everybody went to sleep.
Yeah, the safety of the sun.
Yeah, and so that's the same location where these small tracks are found. And so it's a very unique area. I've never had a ghost experience. I've never been around people who've seen a ghost. And so that was a first for me, and not something I was looking for. I was there for Sasquatch or whatever it is that's making those little tracks.
Yeah, something normal like that.
Yeah, there you go. Throw in the ghost experience, and it's a pretty interesting place to visit.
Kirk, before we get off the I'm not going to call it woo. I'm just going to call it something that happened. What's your take on zapping?
Well, a lot of people speculate that it's infrasound, a sound below our level of hearing, a super low sound that Sasquatches can generate somehow in their chest cavity that then impacts people physiologically. And there's evidence the gorillas in Africa have a third air sac in their chests and in their lower throat that has the capability to generate that kind of sound. So if Sasquatch have that kind of organ or third lung or whatever you want to call it in their chest cavity, in their physiology, their anatomy, I should say, then it's possible that they can use that to create this super low sound, or they could even use that super low sound to communicate, similar to they've found that that's how elephants communicate with one another, through infrasound, because it travels many miles for over long distances. And so there's no question that infrasound has an effect on humans. It's even that the military makes weapons with it to subdue people. And so the science is there to make it legitimate. As to the claims that infrasound can be directed, I don't know how you can direct a sound. It pretty much goes 360. But it is an interesting phenomenon, and I don't discount it. I've never.
Well, there's so many people that are credible that attest, yes, it happened to me.
Yeah. I have experienced what many people refer to as night terrors, where you wake up and you're paralyzed. And many people have attributed those kind of experiences to being zapped or experiencing infrasound from a Sasquatch. It's hard to tell. It's hard to really know. But
it would be one of those things that's impossible. I mean, when I think of like somebody being zapped, like my personal thought is you're having an anxiety attack.
Right. There's possibility of it being an anxiety attack, or the night terrors I was telling you about. It's a real thing that happens to many people, where you wake up, but you're paralyzed, because it's like your body is still in a dream state, and your brain is still in park, but you're somehow conscious, and it's a body brain disconnect that paralyzes you for a while until they sync up again. And it happens to many people. And I experienced it once while out in the woods. And at the time, I thought I might have been zapped by a Sasquatch, but I've since come to the conclusion that it was just that phenomenon that happens many times to people, of just simple night terror, or whatever they call it.
Yeah, the people that I've heard talk about it, it's never one of those like, proud moments like, oh, I'm going to talk about being zapped or anything, but they're not going to, shy away from it and deny that there's nothing to it.
Right.
It's just nobody really knows, what happens. Is it anxiety? Is it, sleep deprivation? Or are you in some sort of a dream state and then you snap out of it? It's all over the board, but there's no doubt in my mind, something happens to a lot of people out there.
Right. That's yet another part of the mystery that we hope to figure out someday. But there's one thing I would like to talk to you about, is the impact of thermal imaging on the Bigfoot researching field, if you'll allow me to.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually wanting to kind of go into that, because you've had a lot of experience with it.
Okay.
And in the past, during my own research, there's been numerous times where we've been standing there, uh, focused on that noise we're hearing, just beyond the tree line, and oh, that sounds like bipedal steps. And if we only had a thermal imager.
Exactly. So when I got involved at the first BFRO expedition in '09, and then I started going out with all the folks here in Washington on private outings, private expeditions, it was just the most fun, the most glorious experience you could ever imagine, because every night walk, we were surrounded by Sasquatches. They were everywhere. People were seeing shadow movement in the shadows, and they were hearing footsteps, and things were being thrown, and they were seeing eye glow, and they were just everywhere. Every night walk, the Sasquatches were all around us, and it was the most fun I've ever had. And I thought, all right, as soon as these thermals come out that record on board, it's game over.
Right.
And now, I will admit, though, on those night walks, I never saw any of the stuff that everybody else was reporting, but I would get swept up in the excitement and thinking, well, I'm not seeing it, but I'm sure they must be. So anyway, in January 2010, FLIR came out with a thermal imager that recorded thermal video on board or on the thermal imager itself. And you didn't need to attach anything to it to record the thermal video. And so I'd get together with the same group of people that kept seeing and hearing everything on every other night walk. And they weren't used to me having a thermal imager with me. And so we'd go on the night walks, and sure enough, it had happened again. They were hearing steps, seeing shadows moving between trees, seeing eye glow, et cetera, et cetera. And every time they'd say what they were seeing and where, I'd look with my thermal imager and I'd say, nope, nothing there.
Nothing.
And they go, oh, well, dang, I could have sworn I saw something. And we'd walk away a little ways further. There, eye glow. There, right over there, behind that tree. I'd look at my thermal. Nope, nothing there. And eventually, as the night walks would progress throughout the year, there'd be less and less activity until by the end of the year, we'd go on night walks and nothing at all would happen. Nobody would report seeing or hearing anything. And to me, it was a revelation that many people had been letting their imaginations run wild. And everybody was getting swept up in the excitement of it. And it became a group that we were surrounded by Sasquatches when actually we weren't. And so the thermal imager helped reveal that human condition of letting your imagination take over and run wild and convince you or convince yourselves that things are out there that really aren't. And I thought it was pretty simple. I thought it was pretty clear and definitive that the thermal had revealed that a lot of the things that the folks were thinking they were experiencing weren't there actually. But an amazing, really interesting thing happened. Instead of them thinking that the thermal imager was proving the Sasquatches weren't there, they instead came to the conclusion that the thermal imager was scaring the Sasquatches away. And this
much like
caused
the fabled game camera problem.
Yes.
Or Bigfoot
correct.
avoids, the game tracker cameras.
And so it became quite a point of contention. There's a element of folks, good-hearted, good people within the Sasquatch community that thinks that thermal imaging technology or any technology scares the Sasquatches away. And they don't like to go out with people like me who use technology because I spoil all the fun.
Right.
Whenever I'm around, nothing happens. Whenever I'm not there and there's no technology, there's all kinds of activity. And to me, they're just letting their imaginations run wild. To them, I'm the killjoy, or the technology is the killjoy that's scaring all the Sasquatches away. So it's a difficult situation.
And yet my first sighting happened while I was looking at this thing's face through a night vision scope.
Okay, there you go.
Apparently, they're not afraid of a night vision scope, but they're. I've also heard some people say that their hair insulates them from being detected by the thermal imaging system.
Well, yeah, the thing is like the video we were talking about that I recorded from the blues of the head popping up over the fallen log. That's what you're going to see. If they're trying to conceal themselves, they have to reveal their eyes to look at you.
Right.
And the eyes are the hottest part of the body. That's where the most heat escapes. And through a thermal imager, it doesn't matter what the conditions are, the eyes will always be clearly visible and be heat signatures that you can see with a thermal imager. And so while it's true that either body fat or the type of hair that they have can significantly reduce the heat signature that is visible, they cannot hide the heat from their eyes, nose, or mouth. And what you just described is true, because you can go to a zoo and look at some of the bears, and all you can see real clearly is, like I just said, eyes, nose, and mouth.
Right. But usually you can still see, the shape, the form.
Right. Correct. But if it's been raining and it's cold, and so their bodies are wet, that will diminish their heat signature also.
I believe it was Todd Standing who claimed that bears would not show up on thermal imaging.
Kirk actually got a pretty cool thermal of a cougar on our property.
Yes, I got three. We got 3 thermal videos of cougars on your property.
Was it 3?
Yeah, 2 with the stationary thermal unit recording overnight, and then 1 while I was standing out there by myself scanning with the handheld unit. And I captured a really short clip, about 3 or 4 seconds, of the cougar walking along the fence line.
Wow. I was out one time with a large group of people. We weren't actually Bigfooting. We went into this, it was basically a clearing surrounded by, forest and everything. And it was in an area called Screaming Woman Woods.
Oh boy, yeah. What a name.
And there's probably about, seriously, like 20 of us there. We had opened the gate, pulled our vehicles in there and parked them around, built a big bonfire, and we're sitting, around the fire, just sharing stories, talking, hanging out. And I grabbed one of the night vision scopes that we had and kind of walked back to the back of the vehicles. My back was to the fire. I was probably 20 yards from it. And I was just scanning the tree line, looking for animals, just to see what was out there.
Yep.
And as I'm, scanning around, there's something much closer to me that goes in front of the lens, like I have to pull back, whoa, what was that? And I'm looking around and I'm looking, and I find a tail and everything. I'm like, what is somebody's cat doing out here?
Oh, wow.
And, I pull it back a little bit farther and everything. And then I realize, it's a cougar that's, probably 50 feet away from me.
Yeah, that's a little unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, there's 20 people here with a bonfire. And this thing's just walking by it doesn't care. But it's
smooth operator.
Yeah, but it also caused me to realize why that area is called Screaming Woman Woods.
Oh, yes, cougars can make sounds that sound like screaming women, right?
Supposedly. I've yet to hear it, but that's what I'm told.
Yeah, I've heard clips on YouTube.
Well,
when
Jonathan,
it comes to any clips of any type of animal, people are like, "Oh, have you seen a Bigfoot make that kind of a noise?" Well, we kind of have to use the same type of mentality towards known animals. Like, oh, cougars can sound like a woman screaming. All right, let's see a video of one doing that.
Well, I was going to ask you, have you heard any vocalizations around your property that sound like a screaming woman now that you know that cougars are out there?
I don't know about a screaming woman, but there's been very strange, like I wouldn't attribute them to Bigfoot sounds, but it was just like simply strange screeches that the only thing that would make sense to me is a cougar.
What are have you heard Kirk like vocalizations and that you attribute to Bigfoot while out in the field? Like, have you heard, the famous siren calls and the howls and things of that nature?
Yes. I got the triple moan howl recorded at Morton, near Morton, Washington. There is a vocalizer, which we believe to be a Sasquatch, at this location near Morton that many people have heard through the years. And we had just arrived for a weekend research trip there. And we were setting up our camp. It was still daylight. It was like 2 hours until sunset. And all of a sudden, the woods just exploded with whoops and howls and screams. And I sprinted to my vehicle and grabbed my audio recorder and turned it on. And I was able to capture what I call the triple moan howl. It was a 3 long moaning howls in a row. And then it was followed by 2 distinct whoops that were much closer to us. That was one of the most interesting audio recordings that I've ever captured. There's one that I really wish I'd have captured, but I didn't have my audio running during the May 2012 BFRO expedition at the same location that I was the organizer for. We were on a night walk, and a fellow let out 3 whoops, and 5 seconds after his third whoop, in response came the best vocalization I've ever heard of anything recorded or anything I've heard live. It sounded like opera singer or Ella Fitzgerald in the middle of the woods responding with three perfectly executed whoops that no human could duplicate, in my opinion, especially from where it came from, out in the middle of nowhere where there's no road, no camp, and nobody there. So that one always bites me in the butt. I wish I would have gotten that recorded.
We're definitely going to have Kirk on another time, because Morton is a whole nother series of stories. I was simply leading, since I know him, I've been leading into like my favorite stories, but I've left out when Kirk was in his vehicle and he was getting his vehicle shaken while he was sleeping inside of it. And
that was fun.
Well, no, I have to hear that story.
Okay, maybe we do have time for it.
Okay, I was at the Morton location with just one other fellow, Bill Rogers, and he had his Ford Excursion or Expedition, one of those big Ford SUVs, and I had my little Chevy Tracker, and it was super cold. We were there in February, and it was well below freezing at night, and so we were both sleeping in our vehicles, and I had 2 thermals set up running on top of my vehicle, one facing forward, one forward to the south, and one to the west. And I was asleep in my vehicle, and because of my perspiration breath and the cold outside, the windows were all frosted over. You could not see out. And the moon had set, so it was pitch black out. And I was awakened to what I thought were wood knocks up above and to the east, upslope. And we were in an old gravel pit. And there's an old trail or road that goes from the hillside down into the gravel pit. And the sound I heard that I thought were wood knocks that awakened me were at the top of this little road to the east. And as I was snapping out of my sleep and trying to focus on what I was hearing, the sound kept getting closer. And then I realized it was coming down that little trail right toward us. And as it came closer and closer and closer, I then realized that the sounds weren't wood knocks, but it was something like a empty Folgers can or an empty oatmeal box or a tub, like if you pound the side of it.
Right.
And they were tapping it. The sound sounded like that, but there was no rhythm to it. It was sporadic. But this sound was moving, and it was distinctive and not something just blowing around in the wind. And so it came down that road and came to the left side of my vehicle and stopped there. And then and I'm inside my vehicle and trying to figure out what's going on. And remember, I have a thermal pointing straight ahead and to the right, and this thing is on the left side, so it's not in the view of the thermal. And then it moved around to the back of my vehicle, and that's where my head is. My head is right at my tailgate, and so this thing is standing right outside my vehicle, doing this crazy tap, 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 tap sound. Gee, now that I just did that, I wonder if he was doing Morse code. Anyway, and then it moved over to Bill's vehicle, and I was searching everywhere in my vehicle trying to find my radio so I could call Bill, and I could not find my handheld radio. And
well, you were probably in a frenzy at that point.
I was. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and then it came back to the back of my vehicle, and then it moved over to the right side, but only on the right side up to my right rear tire. And then it tapped on the side of my vehicle. It like if you take your fingertips and tapped on the side of my vehicle. And
I would have lost it. A horn would be honking, headlights would be coming on.
So then it moved from the right side of my vehicle, but what was really so frustrating and one of those things that makes you just wonder what's going on, it stopped just before it would have walked in front of the thermal that was pointing to the right, which was above the front right passenger seat. And so then it went from the right side of the vehicle back behind the back over to the left side of the vehicle up to the driver's side door. And then things started to move around on top of my vehicle because trying to conceal the thermal cameras up there, I'd placed a 5-gallon bucket, some boots, my spade, a couple of gear containers, and those things started to move. I could hear them sliding on my vehicle roof, and that's when I lost it. I couldn't find my radio to call Bill for backup, and I thought, what am I going to do? And so I decided what I'll do is I'll honk the horn and turn the light on, the lights on, and see what happens. So that's what I did, and all activity stopped. And then Bill heard me honking the horn, and next thing I know, he's calling me on the radio, which enabled me to find the radio. And I said, an expletive, something is expletive messing with my truck. And Bill said, all right, I'll get out and I'll cover you. And so Bill is always well armed. And so I felt safer knowing that he was out of his vehicle with weapons. And so then I came out And we looked all over, and there's no evidence. We couldn't find anything because it's gravel, it's hard packed soil in that gravel pit area where we were, and so there's no tracks to be found. But Bill likes to tell that story about how I was totally freaked out, and I was pacing and hyperventilating, and my eyes were buggy for about 2 hours after that experience. But then after I calmed down, he shared with me what had happened earlier that night before my activity. He said that he was sleeping on his back in his vehicle, and something pushed the side of his vehicle so hard that it rolled him over from his back onto his left side.
Wow.
And I tried pushing his Ford Excursion, and you can't hardly budge that thing. It's so big and heavy. And something was strong enough to push that thing so violently that it rolled him over from his back to his side.
Wow.
And he didn't do anything because he was hoping it would do it again, or it would walk in front of the thermal. But it didn't. And then the next morning, he had this gear bag that he has a bunch of equipment and backup supplies in that he had underneath his back bumper. Something had pulled that bag out, unzipped it, and emptied half of the contents out of the bag. Nothing was scattered around like an animal had done it. It was purposefully removed from the bag. Nothing was missing, but items were removed, unzipped, and then items removed from the bag and placed on the ground.
I don't know if you've heard this report or read this report, but I happen to know one of the people joining you in your Falcon Project trip is Randy Harrington.
Oh, yeah. I've gotten to know Randy, and he is a great fellow.
And he has experienced something very similar that took place literally at where my main research area was located.
Okay.
Right. The funny thing about it is he was also in his vehicle. I believe he had a camera pointed out the windshield or something like that. It never went in front of the vehicle. It was in his truck, I believe. It messed around with stuff in the back of the truck. I think it actually took like a refillable propane tank, like a 5-gallon tank or something. But as it approached the truck from a distance away, it had a stick that it was like tapping on things as it walked by it.
No way. I had not heard that.
Yeah, and I think I remember him talking about at one point he could actually, as it got close enough, it started dragging the tip of the stick on the ground, on the road there, and he could hear it dragging on the ground as it approached the vehicle. And he was able to observe them in like the rearview mirrors of his car, and there's like 2 of them, I want to say. And
okay, yeah, he told me that part.
It happened at a location, like I said, that was my main research area, and he was camped out at the same place that we would always camp out at, where I had a experience kind of similar, but I was actually in a tent, but something came up and was messing with my car. I had a Ford Explorer, as a matter of fact, and it was part the way that the tents were set up and everything. My car was actually like 3 or 4 feet away from where I was at, but I was inside a tent.
Gotcha.
And it actually lifted the door handle closest to me and let go of it, and it snapped back down. And at the time, I thought, there's somebody trying to steal our stuff. There's somebody breaking into my car. And it's a long story, I'll tell you sometime, but the unique thing about that experience is we were waiting on other people to get there, and we didn't know when they were going to arrive, and it was going to be in the middle of the night sometime, early morning. We all had gone to bed at like around 1:30. So since we knew these other people were coming in, and we were the only people in the park, we left like 3 lanterns on as we went to bed and like filled them up with fuel and everything, so they would be able to see where we were at and not trip around trying to get out and get their tent set up and everything. Well, whenever this all took place, all the lanterns were turned off. And, I pointed it out to another guy that was there, and he went around and all the lanterns still had fuel in them. They were all fueled up. About half the fuel was gone in them. It had only been burning for like a couple of hours, and they had all been turned to the off position.
And nobody said they'd done it.
No, nobody had done it. Whatever was out there is what turned the lanterns off. And it had the area, like I'm sure you've seen campgrounds like this. They'll have the pea gravel spread around the campsite and everything.
Right.
And at this particular location, it was packed down, but it had loose gravel on top, probably about an inch thick or so. And we found perfectly defined barefooted tracks walking right by my tent, just like I heard it walk by my tent, walking all around camp.
And they were big tracks.
Big, yeah, big.
Yeah.
We couldn't cast them obviously because it was just impressions in the gravel.
Right.
But yeah, that was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. But it was at that same location where Randy had his experience that was mind-blowingly similar to what you just described.
Yeah, I look forward to sitting around a campfire with Randy and talking about our two experiences, comparing them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I loved having you on.
Thanks, Matt.
This has been awesome. I definitely want you to come back after you return from the field.
Oh, yeah, I'll have lots to talk about then.
I can imagine if you're not too busy, going on Good Morning America and shows like that, hopefully.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
It would be awesome.
If we get that kind of definitive evidence that we have those kind of interview requests. That's not to put you guys down at all.
No,
that
absolutely not.
would be super awesome.
If you have to settle for Good Morning America, but no, man,
that would be cool.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing about it, and so yeah, man, hook up with us whenever you get back for sure.
All right,
I think Kirk's made such amazing finds, even aside from the Falcon Project, and especially considering that he's been at it hardcore since like 2008, 2009, whatever the specific year may be. I mean, he hasn't been out for 5 months at a time, and nobody has, and he's produced some pretty amazing evidence already. Who's to say what he can produce after 5 months of being just out there nonstop? Right.
Well, it's going to be a team effort. We're all going to be there helping and supporting one another. So whatever comes out of our efforts over the 5 months, it'll be the team producing it. But I'll definitely be giving it everything I got.
Oh, good job, company man.
Go Falcon Project.
Yeah, go Team Falcon. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. I'll post a link to Kirk's channel down there. So just click on it and you can check out some of his videos. Thanks for tuning in for another Bigfoot Crossroads.